When Will and Grace premiered on NBC in September of 1998, it wasn't just another sitcom joining the Thursday night comedy lineup. It was a radical act disguised as primetime entertainment. In a television era dominated by heterosexual storylines with LGBTQ plus characters often relegated to the margins or left out entirely, Will and Grace placed two gay men at the very center of their story, and not in coded or closeted roles, but fully, explicitly, unapologetically out. Hi everyone, my name is Madeline. This is Madeline Media. If you've never been here before, welcome. Happy Pride. If you have been here before, you might have noticed that I took a few weeks off. I was doing a big transition at work into a new position, so just wanted to get my feet on the ground there before I was making content because I didn't want the content to be subpar. But hello, I'm back. Nice to see you again. And happy Pride to you too. So today we're going to be talking about my favorite TV show of all time, Will and Grace. I have seen Will and Grace all the way through probably 100 times. I can finish the punchline to any joke. I know every single nook and cranny and nuance. I know all the jokes. I know all the storylines. I know literally the entire show top to bottom is burned into my brain. It's my favorite show ever, 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 ever. And since it's Pride, I'm actually filming this on the very last day of Pride. I wanted to just make a video about my favorite show of all time, which I think is entirely overlooked when we have conversations both about LGBTQ plus people on TV and also just television in general for its cultural impact, its television impact, its queer impact. And so that's what today's video is going to be about, is my favorite show of all time and why I think it's so important. Obviously, the Will in Will and Grace is Mr. Will Truman, played by Eric McCormack. He is the intelligent, straight-laced lawyer with a dry wit and a warm heart. And there's Jack McFarland, played by Sean Hayes, his flamboyant, high-energy best friend, that were not side characters or punchlines. They weren't there to serve the arcs of their straight friends. They were the show. They had emotional complexity, careers, romantic aspirations, and deep friendships. And this marked the first time in American broadcast history that openly gay lead characters had this level of screen time, dimensionality, and visibility in a mainstream, widely watched network television show. To grasp why that mattered, you have to understand where we were before Will and Grace arrived. For decades, gay characters on television were essentially non-existent. There's a really incredible documentary on Apple TV Plus called Visible, which I would highly recommend. It's just going through queer people and their evolution on television from its inception to now, that gives a much more detailed, nuanced, and expert overview than I could ever give. Not only were queer characters often non-existent, in the rare cases where they did appear, they were often written as tragic, sick, or deviant, and they were side characters with sad endings or jokes whose identities were the punchline. In the 1970s and 80s, a few dramas tiptoed into queer storylines, but always with a very cautious hand. And in many cases, gay characters were introduced solely to die of AIDS, be beaten and rejected, or serve as lessons for straight characters to learn tolerance. Sitcoms, for their part, rarely even tried. In 1997, the year before Will and Grace debuted, Ellen DeGeneres famously changed the landscape with the puppy episode of her sitcom Ellen, where both she and the character came out as gay. It was a groundbreaking moment. It was emotional, powerful, widely covered by the media, but the backlash was swift. The show lost advertisers, the tone shift, the ratings fell, and it was canceled not long after. Ellen herself was essentially blacklisted from Hollywood for years, which is so, insane to think about now, considering that she ended up ruling daytime for decades.
Why did you think it was necessary for you to come out? You know, you've read some of the mail. People say, so if you're going to, why not just let that be your business? Why was it necessary for you to come out, tell the public? Why was it necessary for the character to do so?
Because it's okay. Because it is okay.
I did Oprah's show, I did the cover of Time magazine, and I did a Diane Sawyer interview. That's all I did. That's all I planned on doing. But because it became such a huge cultural thing and 45 million people watched it, and then people all around the world talked, and then an article was written, and then another article was written, and then an article was written on that article, and then everybody got so sick of it. It got to the point where even Elton John, who I'd never met in my life, Elton John said, "We know you're gay, shut up and be funny." And I was like, you can imagine how much that hurt me, because I was like, I don't even know. I hadn't even said anything. I'd done 3 interviews. It's funny because all along, that was my biggest fear, is that it was going to get canceled. And I was not told that it was canceled. I was told through an assistant who read it in the trades.
It's no different than adultery. It's no different than, robbing, stealing, lying, cheating.
We all have things that are wrong with us, and we all do things that are wrong.
That's you saying that it's wrong. Look at all the millions of gay people in this country who don't think that being gay is wrong.
So we should accept it, though? Why?
Then it was all kinds of other lessons of learning what it's like to not be loved and to be the butt of everybody's joke on television and in magazines. And so I had to learn what that feels like, to not let things like that get to you. I never wanted to be an activist. I just wanted to entertain people. I just wanted to make people feel good. I remember the first letter I got where somebody said I saved their life, that they were going to kill themselves, and that they didn't because of what I did. But since I've witnessed the discrimination and the double standards and heard about the statistics for gay teen suicides, I've had to rethink that. And so if by standing up for what I think is right makes me an activist, I'm an activist.
It was a clear signal that the American television industry still saw queerness as a risk, especially if it took up too much space. So when Will and Grace debuted just 1 year later, the stakes were very high. The country was still reeling from the brutal murder of Matthew Shepard, a 21-year-old gay man in Wyoming killed in a hate crime that captured national attention. Don't Ask, Don't Tell was still the U.S. military policy. Marriage equality was a fringe idea, not a national goal. And representation of queer people in politics, business, and culture was limited and often sanitized. And yet, here came a sitcom on NBC, one of the big 3 networks, introducing America to a gay lawyer and his fabulous best friend. What made Will and Grace work was that it didn't just introduce gay characters, it normalized them. It invited viewers into their apartments, their friendships, their awkward dates, their family dinners. It made them part of the fabric of everyday American life, and importantly, it paired their storylines with those of female characters. Grace Adler, Will's neurotic, spirited best friend and roommate, played by Deborah Messing, and Karen Walker, Grace's wealthy, eccentric assistant with a pill problem and a one-liner for every situation, played by Megan Mullally, now, of course, viewed as an iconic gay icon. I know you can't describe a gay icon as iconic, but I just did because Karen is a 2x icon, in my opinion. The interplay between these 4 characters allowed the show to present multiple types of relationships: romantic, platonic, queer, and straight, all with equal emotional weight. For queer audiences, the show was affirming. It was visibility in the truest sense, seeing aspects of yourself reflected on screen not as a tragic figure or a stereotype, but as a person with agency and humor and flaws. And for straight audiences, it was disarming. Will was likable. Jack was really funny. The world didn't end when they kissed boys or talked about their love lives. That slow, consistent exposure on a major network at the height of sitcom popularity did something that political arguments and op-eds often couldn't. It changed hearts. By the early 2000s, Will and Grace had become one of NBC's top shows, easily averaging over 10 million viewers a week. It racked up Emmy wins and Golden Globes. Fun fact, Will and Grace is one of 3 television casts in history where every single cast member has an Emmy, so it's All in the Family, The Golden Girls, and Will and Grace. So that's a holy trinity right there. That's a good trio. I love it. And perhaps most importantly, it did open the doors for more LGBTQ plus characters and storylines on television. Shows like Queer as Folk, The L Word, Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, Glee, and even reality series like Boy Meets Boy likely wouldn't have happened if Will and Grace hadn't shown that there was an audience, a mainstream audience, willing to embrace queerness in entertainment. In a 2012 interview on Meet the Press, then Vice President Joe Biden credited the show directly and said, quote, "I think Will and Grace did more to educate the American public than almost anything anybody has ever done. People fear that which is different, and now they're beginning to understand." Remember when Joe Biden was just vice president? Wasn't that nice?
When things really begin to change is when the social culture changes. I think Will and Grace probably did more to educate the American public than almost anything anybody's ever done so far.
An extraordinary tribute there. And joining me now are the Emmy-winning stars of the show, Deborah Messing and Eric McCormack. Welcome to you both.
Thank
Great
you.
to be here.
What a moment that must have been. I mean, were you watching that live? How did you hear about it?
I didn't see. Did you see it live?
I
didn't see it
did,
live,
and my eyes started to cry. I mean, I think it was like the proudest moment of my life besides the birth of my son.
Really?
Yeah.
And it was a gradual thing because we never wanted to take that kind of credit during the show. We just wanted to be
Right.
a funny show and not take ourselves too seriously. But it's nice to know that we planted some seeds.
I mean, not just planted seeds, but that was a pivotal moment, really. When Vice President Biden made that comment, it was a pivotal moment in the whole debate in America about gay marriage. He was the one that actually went faster than the president.
That's right.
And took the president with him. And I think to get a name check to a comedy show on television as
Right.
being, in his eyes, a fundamental part of the debate process, really extraordinary.
Particularly when it's been off the air for some time. There was no sort of cultural cachet at the moment to bring us up, except to
Right.
give. I mean, for me, there was a lot of criticism early on about my character that perhaps he wasn't gay enough, that he was neutered or safe for America. But we were saying today that the idea that instead of running around and sleeping with a lot of guys, that he was actually just looking for one man to love, turns out is a much more dangerous idea to Americans and much more subversive than we realized.
That statement made headlines not just for its praise of the show, but for what it suggested about culture leading politics. Biden's comments came just days before President Obama announced his public support for same-sex marriage, which people tend to forget he had actually initially ran in 2008 with his official stance being against same-sex marriage. Behind the scenes, the show's co-creator Max Muchnick revealed that Biden had expressed the same thoughts at a private event weeks earlier. Over time, the cultural recognition of Will and Grace only grew. In 2004, the show's characters were listed in Bravo's 100 Greatest TV Characters. In 2012, The Washington Post ranked it among the top NBC comedies of all time. And most importantly, in my opinion, in 2014, the Smithsonian accepted scripts, props, and set decorations from the show into its permanent collection, cementing its place not just in cultural history, but American history. Also worth noting, in 2023, more recently, Variety ranked Will and Grace among its 100 greatest television shows of all time. Now, I think it's important for me to point out that, of course, no show is perfect. Will and Grace has definitely had its fair share of critiques for its narrow scope, primarily representing white, cisgender gay men and not really reflecting the full breadth of LGBTQ plus identities. And specifically with Jack and his portrayal, there's sometimes, been criticized that they lean too hard into flamboyant stereotypes or failed to incorporate the intersectional experiences of queer people of color or trans individuals. But I think we need to contextualize all those arguments with when it came on the air. They were people who were sending the cast death threats. There were calls that the show be removed just for having two, white, I almost said straight white men. Hello, missing the whole point. But two cisgender white men who happened to be gay, that was already pushing a major boundary and shattering a gay glass ceiling in and of itself. I would say that despite those limitations that may come with those critiques, we have to contextualize and remember that this show made undeniable progress. It moved the needle, and it gave the television industry and its viewers a new template as to how gay characters could be portrayed, marketed, and ultimately received by audiences. The show ran for 8 seasons, ending in the early 2000s, but when the show returned in 2017 for a 3-season revival, it was clear just how far the world had come and how much work was still left to do. That time around, Will and Grace tackled the Trump-era politics, gay parenting, gender identity, the evolution of queer relationships in the digital age. The characters were older, wiser, but still hilarious, and they proved once again that those stories really matter. I also want to point out that for whatever limitations Will and Grace had for being the first to do something, they really did always try to be as inclusionary as possible. I do think of this one specific episode that sticks out in my head where it was the first time I ever saw a trans person on TV was on Will and Grace. There's an episode where they throw a bachelor party for their straight buddy and they're trying to figure out what you do to throw a straight bachelor party and they hire a stripper, the stripper ends up being a trans woman. And that stripper's transness is never played as the butt of the joke. It's never really like, obviously there's a misunderstanding about it, which is like the whole sitcom element of it, but it was never seen as a degrading thing. There's no jokes about, that I think are demeaning or degrading to trans people. And she is just kind of like another human character in the show. And like, for what it's worth, like to get that on TV in the late 90s, like it was an early season, that episode, I think is pretty impressive. Like all criticisms aside, like they were working up against a ton of bricks, like a very anti-LGBTQ plus America. And they were able to get not only two gay main characters, but then a trans woman on screen. I'll take it. I'll take it. In the end, I think Will and Grace didn't just reflect change, it created change. And it told audiences that queer people weren't new or scary or other. They were your neighbors, your coworkers, your best friends, and they were worthy of love, laughter, and the spotlight. And that's why Will and Grace isn't just one of the greatest sitcoms of all time, it's one of the most important. It didn't just entertain, it made history. Or herstory, depending on who you ask. So thank you so much for watching. If you love Will and Grace like me, I want to hear your favorite moments, episodes, quotes. Please comment below. I love reading your guys' comments. If you've never seen the show, I urge you to watch it because it's literally the funniest show ever. You will have a ball up in this bitch. But yeah, thank you so much for watching and happy Pride. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Hopefully I'll be back next week with a new video. And I really appreciate all of your guys' views and support. So have a great rest of your Pride, but Pride is all year long if you're like me. Yes, go gay people. Gays rule.